1979's Alien, I think, is my favorite film of all time. This terrifying surprise fourth act in the escape shuttle is perfect, with the Xenomorph hidden in plain sight 5 minutes before he reveals himself. Ripley's eyes cross him the moment she enters it, and this mysterious choice by Sigourney Weaver to sing "You Are My Lucky Star." And now, 44 years later, I think I finally figured out why Sigourney chose this song. It blew my mind when I connected the dots, and at the end of this analysis, I will explain how this choice ties in with Star Wars, cements Alien as a Hollywood classic, and underlies who the true alien of this movie is. I'm Erik Voss, and this is The Deep Dive, a channel that dives deep into films we admire. And when it comes to Alien, I admire its purity.
The perfect organism, its structural protection matched only by its hostility. A survivor unclouded by conscience, remorse, or delusions of morality.
I almost led with this clip because Ian Holm just knew how to make faces that stay with us. Alien is one of these movies that a lot of people know a lot about, but I set out to make the definitive analysis of Ridley Scott's sci-fi horror classic, its incredible attention to detail, its deeper meaning, and yeah, at least one new discovery in the final scene that I really don't think anyone else has put together, because it takes the right mix of movie nerd, Ripley stan, musical lover, and Star Wars fan to appreciate. Check, 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 and check. We open with the 5 letters of the word alien, forming line by line over images of the LV-426 planetoid system. Jerry Goldsmith composed the score, and what we hear in this movie is largely temp scoring pulled from his work from films like 1962's Freud, as that was darker and more mysterious than what Goldsmith composed for this movie, and that swap really pissed off Goldsmith. But still, his music in this movie, super great. But the reason I show this clip is it's the other sounds I want to single out, as we are really hearing the beacon from the space jockey on the planetoid calling out to the Nostromo. Not a distress call, but a warning, and really functionally a siren call drawing in this doomed crew. Now, it's only ever called the planetoid in this 1979 film, but future films refer to it as LV-426, and drafts of this movie script called it Acheron, which is the river in Greek mythology described as the stream of woe, a branch of the river Styx that forms the border of hell in Dante's Inferno, making it an appropriately named planetoid. And this film, if you think about it, really opens and closes with a song of despair and a song of hope, which is why I think it's really important to single out these opening sounds. Simple text reports to us: commercial towing vehicle, the Nostromo, crew 7, cargo, refinery processing, 20 million tons of mineral ore, course, returning to Earth. Now, the Nostromo gets its name from the ship in Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, as this ship is very much plunging into a heart of darkness. Here, the ship is initially shrouded in darkness. All the lights are off because it's a dormant ship, making it look like a haunted house. Its huge towers are actually not part of the ship, but the huge refinery platform that it's towing, which, according to scale designs of this, would be 2 miles or 3.2 kilometers long and 1.5 miles or 2.4 kilometers wide. So the effect we get is a haunted house in space, which is what writers Dan O'Bannon and Ron Shusett can see. Really, they would pitch this as a Texas Chainsaw Massacre in space. Bit of background here: at USC, Dan O'Bannon had actually worked on John Carpenter's thesis project, a movie called Dark Star, which was kind of a parody of Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. But Dan O'Bannon wanted to do a 2001 type movie, but as a serious horror film with an alien that looks real. So he ended up teaming up with Shusett, who was then working on what would later become Total Recall. They worked together off of O'Bannon's 29-page Treatment, which was really just the opening act of the film. But then Dan O'Bannon got a call to work on a dream project and headed to Paris to work on Dune. But no, not Denis Villeneuve's Dune, not even David Lynch's Dune, but Jodorowsky's Dune, the infamous failed adaptation of Frank Herbert's novel. And while this completely fell apart, this is where Dan O'Bannon met some amazing artists, like British sci-fi novel cover artist Chris Foss and Swiss concept artist H.R. Giger, whose opium-induced nightmares and artistry was both beautiful and horrifying and became the visual look of Alien and so many sci-fi works that came after. So O'Bannon went back to the States, got back together with Shusett, and they nearly sold their script, which was originally titled Star Beast, but O'Bannon hated that name, and he looked through the script and saw the recurring word alien and realized no other movie had been called Alien before, and it works because it's both a noun and an adjective. And remember that adjective because it applies to the deeper themes of this movie. They nearly sold this project to Roger Corman's studio, which would have made Alien a B horror movie, but they instead partnered with Brandywine, who had connections license to Fox. And then in 1977, when Star Wars came out, suddenly every studio greenlit whatever sci-fi projects they had, and Alien was at the top of the stack. It got a budget of $4.2 million, which was a lot of money back then, and they scored up-and-coming director The Duelist's Ridley Scott. And I think it's important to know this history, because while Alien would not exist as this high production value hit without Star Wars, conceptually it predates Star Wars as sci-fi grounded in a darker take on Herbert's Dune, on Kubrick's 2001, and on stories like The Thing from Another World, Forbidden Planet, and Planet of the Vampires. It's just a reminder that Star Wars is really space fantasy, Alien is actual science fiction. And while they share this DNA, they're really like siblings raised on completely different planets. Now, the very talented Ron Cobb designed the interiors of the Nostromo to look grimy and industrial, as this is not a pristine Star Trek vessel, but a blue-collar trucker hauler. The interiors have these exposed pipes and everything is wet, making them perfect camouflage for the Xenomorph later. Cobb and Giger actually worked hand in hand, intending on the alien's industrial look to be a kind of intelligent design or super efficient evolution for this species to parasitically invade exactly these types of spaces. Ridley Scott's opening interior shots explore this empty main deck to give us spatial geography, but also to show how these 7 crew members are in a practical confined space with no windows or glimpses of the outside stars, so that we feel their claustrophobia as this unfolds. Now, above all the hatches of this location and throughout the ship, you'll notice these symbols. Ron Cobb created Semiotic Standard, which he intended as an in-universe language for all commercial vehicles. Semiotic Standard also shows up in some other sci-fi films like the 2011 film Moon, which is also amazing. Trust me, as you rewatch this movie, you're just gonna start to see it everywhere. It's awesome. Actually, my favorite of these is number 23, coffee, which is in the shape of a coffee mug. So here in the shot of the deck over on the right, we see, I guess it's coffee, galley, and ladderway. And then on the left portal, we see astronic systems and hazard. So the entire ship of the Nostromo begins to wake up, like a ghost waking up in the middle of the night. Because look, yeah, that chair moves by itself, and then the pages flutter by itself. Spooky! For a second, we think like an alien might have bumped it. Maybe Jones did. But no, it's really just the airflow of the ship awakening to allow life, and really all kinds of life, to breathe in this giant petri dish. The creepiest thing about this is the way the Nostromo, the way Mother, turns on the crew and uses them as bait, feeding them oxygen, but really just to prime them as vessels for what she really wants to bring back to Earth. So yes, the Nostromo's CPU, Mother, comes in with this message that reflects on the empty space helmet. Mother, or M-U-T-H-U-R, is the name of the ship's AI, and the name Mother was really chosen as part of the Freudian sexual symbolism that O'Bannon and Shusett coded into this film. The ship is named Mother, and the ship is meant to symbolize the initial comforts of a womb. The alien's head shape is phallic, its inner jaw is so penetrative, and the fertilization process of the facehugger is designed to be oral rape, and specifically to make male viewers uncomfortable, according to the screenwriter O'Bannon. Actually, in the making of documentary, co-writer Shusett said,
Dan said, somehow the monster has to get on board the ship in a way that'll amaze everybody. And so I wake up in the middle of the night and I said, Dan, I have an idea. And he said, what? And I said, the monster screws one of the people. He says, what? What are you talking about? I said, he jumps in his face, plants a tube down him, inserts his seed in him, and later it comes bursting out of his stomach. And Dan goes, oh.
So really, it comes down to a Freudian anxiety of penetration and sexual violence. Like Lambert actress Veronica Cartwright said,
Giger's sets were so erotic, and I mean, it's big vaginas and penises, and I mean, it's like, you know, it's the whole thing is like you're going inside of some sort of womb or whatever. I mean, it's sort of visceral and all of those things, and I think all those elements came into it, and that's what makes it really work.
So yes, calling the ship Mother is what makes this penetration feel so perverse, because the ship is Mother, the humans inside are her eggs, and the alien is the sperm that she's letting inside to fertilize her eggs. And if Mother gets impregnated in this case, all of humanity is at risk. But also we learn Mother can betray you, and that betrayal feels even worse. The beginnings of that betrayal is what we see right here as the screen lights up, because Alien is at its core a story about motherhood. O'Bannon and Shusett pitched it as Jaws in space, and in my Jaws deep dive I explained how that is a story about how sometimes it takes a father for Alien, and really this is more pronounced in the sequel, Aliens, but it's still here in Alien if you look close enough. The core myth is really sometimes it takes a mother. Here we see the Nostromo screen reading capacity 200 million tons, T-O-N-N-E-S, which is a pretty huge discrepancy from the text earlier, but maybe the company was okay with cargo more than the ore that the Nostromo crew accounted for joining the load. And we actually see the company name here, Weyland-Yutani, appearing on screens and food containers throughout throughout the film, but the name is never spoken until the sequel when James Cameron added a D to make it Weyland-Yutani, which is what the company name was from there forward in the franchise. Ron Cobb actually came up with the name of Weyland-Yutani as a future joint venture between a British corporation and a Japanese corporation, basing it on the British Leyland Motor Corporation and Cobb's Japanese neighbor, whose name was Yutani. So Mother receives the beacon from LV-426, unbeknownst to the crew, and makes this automatic sequence to redirect its course while they are helpless to stop her, and we see the data cruelly reflecting on the space helmet with no human crew person there to witness it, which echoes Mother's dark truth that reflects on Ripley's face later, but also the lights of freedom that this mama will use to purge the invited evil. Because again, this entire mission was set up for the Nostromo crew to be the bait. Weyland-Yutani knew exactly what they were doing from the get-go. So the 7 cryopods open, and again, we see some semiotic standard for a cryogenic vault there. The first human we focus on is actually John Hurt as Kane, and then we see Ian Holm as Ash right beside him. We do not even see Sigourney Weaver as Ripley in the opening bed shot, any of the angles. It's kind of like Alfred Hitchcock focusing on Janet Leigh for the first act of Psycho. Here, Ridley Scott makes Kane seem like the focal character, and John Hurt was one of the more experienced actors of this cast, so we see him as the first one to wake up, and later he'll be the first to die. And he actually foreshadows it with his very first spoken line of the film.
Oh, I feel dead.
And you may have noticed, as Ash sat down, he reached for the milk. Now the fluid that he bleeds later isn't actually cow's milk, but milk is what they put in Ian Holm's mouth for the shot. As he stands up, we see him sucking on his finger, which I always wondered might have been a cut bleeding the white fluid. I'm telling you, every time you watch this movie, watch everything Ian Holm does very carefully. But it's also interesting how Ripley doesn't really have any big lines in this breakfast scene. She really is just there petting Brett's cat, Jones, or Jonesy, Alien being one of the first films to embody the whole screenwriting adage of save the cat. Meanwhile, Dallas, Tom Skerritt, Brett, Harry Dean Stanton, and Parker, Yaphet Kotto, argue about pay. Now Lambert, Veronica Cartwright, came from sci-fi horror history. She was a child actress from Hitchcock's The Birds and later Invasion of the Body Snatchers. She actually thought she was cast as Ripley at first, but Scott told her that what she does better than anyone is just show abject fear on her face, and that they needed a surrogate for the audience's fear in the cast. Now actually, O'Bannon and Shusett wrote all 7 characters in the script to be unisex, interchangeable for men or women, which ended up giving the casting directors a range of options. And actually in the sequel, Lambert is revealed to be transgender on the screen behind Ripley when the company's grilling her. Lambert's screen reading, subject is Despin convert at birth, male to female. So far, no indication of suppressed traumas related to gender alteration. 1986, folks! Ellen Ripley was not therefore written to be a mother. That backstory was added by James Cameron in the sequel, but according to Harry Dean Stanton, O'Bannon did write pages and pages of subtextual backstory for each character, and the fact that Ripley has a daughter might have come up there. But Sigourney Weaver was the youngest and least experienced of the cast, having auditioned for Princess Leia in Star Wars and losing it, of course, to Hollywood royalty Carrie Fisher, and nearly losing this part to her fellow Yale drama grad Meryl Streep, but Streep was grieving the death of her partner and ended up starring in Kramer vs. Kramer, which won this year for Best Picture, though I think Alien is a better movie. But Weaver's inexperience kind of led to hostility from the rest of the cast and crew, and you can totally sense that in the performances. Weaver actually said that Ridley Scott got frustrated with the cast's low energy while shooting the breakfast scene, and took it out on Weaver.
Ridley suddenly turned to me and he grabbed my hand. He said, "Look, I don't want to give you your motivation to pick up your teacup."
Weaver said that she cried, but then Scott caught up with her and apologized and said that he wanted to give the note to the great John Hurt, but he wussed out and said it to her instead. So Weaver's performance that we see on film here really grew out of being the workplace new girl, taking all the shit for everyone else's shortcomings. I love how the script in this scene has them all naturalistically talking over each other in the style of the 70s films of Robert Altman, discussing grounded working man issues.
But everybody else gets more than us.
Dallas, Mother wants to talk to you.
Ash interrupts because he knows what the bigger scheme is and he is playing his part to set it all into motion. So Captain Dallas communicates with Mother in this inner chamber with tech and screens and typefaces far more advanced than what the crew uses on the rest of the ship. This was meant to show that in the year 2122, when this movie is set, technology definitely has cleaner text and animation, flat screens, but that the company doesn't want to share that expense with the blue-collar space truckers, who all use crappier technology with their curved screens. We actually see this crappier tech in a close-up of Lambert's terminal. There's a pack of Balaji Imperial cigarettes, which could be a nod to Bolaji Badejo, the 6'10" Nigerian design student who played the alien in this film. Though associate producer Ivor Powell says that they shot this scene before they had cast Balaji, so it's kind of a mystery. Maybe the insert was shot after the fact, but on the screen in the upper right, you can see D. Geiler for producer Dan Geiler, and Lambert's mug has the winged logo of Weyland-Yutani. Ripley tries to contact Earth's traffic control.
Calling Antarctica Traffic Control. Do you read me, Antarctica? Over.
So apparently in the year 2122, part of Earth's traffic control is in Antarctica, which in my headcanon is the rebuilt base from Carpenter's The Thing, just because Dan O'Bannon and John Carpenter worked together. I know, it's probably not the case because, you know, in the logic of The Thing, that would have been the first time they discovered extraterrestrial life, where Ash in this movie says that it's the first time, but whatever, just let me have it. Now, when Dallas briefs them, Parker kicks Ash out of his chair and then wipes it because no Ash on his chair. But it's a little detail showing the natural tension between Ash and the rest of the crew as he was sent from corporate. He's kind of like their Toby from The Office. And it makes sense because Toby was totally the Scranton Strangler trying to kill everyone. As Parker tries to say he won't check out that beacon without extra pay, Ash continues to hover over his seat and then rolls his eyes with annoyance. And there's a little gesture where Parker swings his elbow around and brushes Ash off. They're ready to come to blows. Ash quotes a clause from their contract to shut him up though.
Any systematized transmission indicating a possible intelligent origin must be investigated.
I don't want to hear it.
Yeah, he quotes it word for word because he is a robot, he has it programmed in his head. As they approach LV-426 or Acheron, a photo of Jonesy the cat as a kitten is pinned behind the knob. We get some great shots of the Nostromo making its orbital ascent, and they created a 12-inch or a 30-centimeter model for the medium and long shots, a 4-foot or 1.2-meter model for the rear shots, and then a 12-foot or 3.7-meter model for the undocking. Now, all of these shots were done with zero VFX. They were just models that they actually built and filmed against black backdrops with stars added with double exposure. And for this undocking, they actually made a 30-foot or 9.1-meter docking arm with model railway kits, and that 12-foot Nostromo model was pushed away from the refinery set by a forklift that was covered in black velvet, so you don't see it underneath it, creating the illusion that the arm was pushing the ship forward. By just taking the time to make every part of this practical, when the violence happens, it makes us feel like that is real too. Now, it is Ash who monitors the terrain and angle and rotation as the Nostromo descends. He might have intentionally landed them in a way that damages the ship just to keep them on this planetoid long enough to get a sample. Even if it's not true, I think we can blame Ash for as much as we can. Ash, citing some side chats that he must have had with Mother, seems super eager to go exploring.
Well, Mother says the sun's coming up in 20 minutes.
And I love how he gives his giddy little wave as they head out. Something about Ian Holm and his finger acting. Ridley Scott actually had his young sons and the son of the cinematographer wear smaller spacesuits when they were walking around the base of the Nostromo, and then later as they walked into the Derelict, and then in the shot beside the space jockey, and it's really important that they do that. While Brett and Parker give Ripley a hard time, Brett uses this soldering tool to light his cigarette. Just a lot of interesting character details about Brett. Like in plenty of other shots, we see that he's like a model ship maker. When it comes to the smoking in that pack of cigs, does it make sense that so many of these characters are chain smoking on a spaceship? No. But does it characterize them better? Yep. Ripley says,
"Don't worry, Parker, yeah. You'll get whatever's coming to you."
Yeah, everyone's getting what's coming to them. And we learn that Parker just kept that steam blowing to mess with Ripley, to make her speak up as she tells them to F off. But also steam blowing in her face is exactly what she's gonna have to deal with when she hits the self-destruct option. So Dallas, Kane, and Lambert find the crashed Derelict, and it looks so good. H.R. Giger designed the exterior craft with the interior bulkheads, everything to be curved and organic, which again, Veronica Cartwright described as a womb. And given the intentionality admitted by the cast and crew, I just don't think it's reaching to say that Derelict's two branched ends evoke the fallopian tubes, especially when this thing contains an egg chamber. Actually, the original designs called for the eggs to be stored in a separate location, an egg silo structure, kind of like a bulbous pyramid, but that was scrapped, so the eggs were relocated in the story to be beneath the space jockey level. So the space jockey, or so he was named, was among the most expensive sets to actually build, and they only built the rear wall of this location, but Shusett insisted that they needed to build this, saying that the film needed a quote Cecil B. DeMille shot. In other words, a real practical spectacle early on that lets the viewers know that they are watching a high production value spectacle. These kind of shots are so important because without that big spectacle train crash in The Greatest Show on Earth, we wouldn't have Steven Spielberg's filmmaking. Now, the film Prometheus would later on imply that this guy was an engineer, but we don't get any of that mythology here, just kind of this creepy mystery, and the fact that he is so huge and still got his chest burst open just makes us really worried for these smaller humans that are visually kids in spacesuits in the shot. Now, before Prometheus, Ridley Scott's longtime pitch for the space jockey, according to the commentary, was that the Derelict was intended to be an egg bomber, and that this guy was the pilot with the intent to drop these bioweapons on planets. But Prometheus explores how the engineers would keep these kind of bio experiments and weapons in their temples. They kind of worshipped the idea of evolution and building new species, but Ridley Scott did bring back the idea of the android David killing the Engineer Society in Alien Covenant by bombing them with the black goo bioweapon. But the hole that Kane discovers was actually burnt open by acid. It was not built into that. The aliens burrowed their way in. So in this crime scene we're stumbling upon here, we get this clue that these things burn acid. Now, Ripley realizes the beacon wasn't a distress signal, it was a warning. And Ash, again, shows his apathy for human life.
I mean, but the time it takes to get there, they'll know if it's a warning or not, yes?
Oh, come on, Ash! How would they know it was a warning unless something really awful would be happening to them? Now, in the egg chamber, we get this cool blue laser cutting through the mist. This is actually provided by the band The Who is testing out concert special effects equipment on the soundstage next door to where Alien was shooting. Ridley Scott uses some really fun camera tricks for the egg opening sequence. When Kane first touches the egg, the fluid on its shell oozes upward, which was created by shooting this egg upside down, hanging. And in the same shot, you see the facehugger stirring inside, which is actually Ridley Scott fluttering his own hands from behind the fiberglass. When Kane looks inside that egg, why would you look in? The lacy innards were actually made from a cow's stomach, which a crew member was reaching down from beneath to bump it to kind of make it look like it was pulsing. And then it all goes down in less than 2 seconds. To achieve this shot, they needed to propel the facehugger prop up at the camera, and if you slow it down, you do see its spiny legs, and they needed to include Kane's point of view of the mouth tube coming right at his face. For that, they used a sheep's intestine, and then pulled it back through the egg and reversed it, so it looked like it was speeding up out of the egg. But as that tube comes through, from Kane's point of view, you can actually see it breaching the helmet, breaking it. So Dallas and Lambert bring Kane back, and Ripley refuses to let them in.
Listen to me, if we break quarantine, we could all die.
It's just crazy how this movie hits differently since 2020. This right here is the moment Ripley first emerges as a sympathetic hero, the one person trying to do the right thing and no one listens to her. Her alarmism is of course proven right throughout the film, but she takes no pleasure in that. Meanwhile, Ash openly defies Ripley to open the hatch, exposing all of them. In case it isn't obvious, the villain isn't the alien in the movie, it's Ash and Mother in the company. And I love it when the hero and the villain just get defined in the same moment like that. We get our first good look at the facehugger as it instinctively tightens its tail around Kane's neck. H.R. Giger said that this was the first thing he designed for the film, and what's most unnerving about it to me are the claws, which Giger designed to be segmented with knuckles. They even use the word knuckle in the movie, kind of like a crab or a spider, but also like two human hands clamping around a head and suffocating it. Veronica Cartwright actually slapped Sigourney Weaver here. So not only does the character of Ripley take abuse from the crew for doing the right thing, Sigourney had to physically endure it as well. And I always think of this moment when Ripley uses the same pejorative to the alien mother in Aliens.
Get away from her, you bitch!
Dallas is eager to get the facehugger off Kane, but Ash says,
Let's not be too hasty.
yeah, again and again, he just seems more excited than he is worried about this. They realize the alien bleeds acid and cuts away at the floor. Now, in that floor close-up, you can actually see it is styrofoam, and they probably splashed styrofoam with acetone, since acetone dissolves styrofoam. Ron Cobb came up with this idea of acid burning through the hull because it would pose a unique challenge for this crew on a spaceship, as they couldn't just kill it through conventional means. It'd be like a spider or a cockroach that you couldn't just crush because it would destroy your apartment. Ash sits alone in the medical bay, observing the creature. On the screen that he turns off when Ripley surprises him was the embryo inside Kane, proving that he knew that Kane was infected. Definitely that moment with Cypher in the Matrix when he flips off the screen as Neo sneaks up behind him was totally a recreation of this moment. Ridley Scott stays on Ian Holm for the entire first half of the scene, even when Ripley arrives, and only cuts to Ripley for this particular line.
Tough little son of a bitch.
And you let him in.
So this shows that Ripley doesn't let shit go. She is confrontational. While Ash praises the alien for being perfectly adapted to survive, he misses the outsider right in front of him who's perfectly adapted to outlast them all. And as Ripley backs off, what does Ash drink in the scene? Mother's milk. Ash, Ripley, and Dallas return to find the facehugger gone mysteriously, and it's such effective horror to just start with a creepy anomaly and then remove it. This is the secret to why Alien works as an effective horror film. When it comes down to it, it's basically the fear that we all have experienced of getting ready to go to bed, reaching to flip off the light switch, and then seeing a spider scuttle beneath the dresser. It's gone from sight, but it's still there. Out of sight, but not out of mind. We all know how that feels to just lose a whole night of sleep over that. In the scene, Ridley Scott keeps the camera low without cutting for a solid minute until Dallas knocks over the container with the loudest slam. And then Ridley Scott primes us with this shot of Ripley looking up at dangling medical equipment, so we don't initially think it's unusual when random stuff is just hanging around her head. So when Ash sticks that probe into the dark corner, we are convinced it's gonna pop out from there, but no, something dangles on Ripley, and the worst possible thing happens! The spider lands on her shoulder! So while the Chestburster Scene or Brett's death are considered the more memorable, suspenseful deaths of this movie, I think this scene is actually the masterclass in horror filmmaking. But of course, like all dead spiders, the little shit clenches with rigor mortis, and when Ash dissects the facehugger. For its innards, they actually used 4 oysters and a sheep kidney. You can actually see the stink on their faces. Dallas lets Ash keep it, and Ripley argues with Dallas by closing the hatch in front of him, foreshadowing the way that Dallas will try to flush out the alien later by opening and closing segments of air vents. We find out the repairs were done, but Ripley delayed telling Dallas, withholding the truth just like the way Ash withholds the truth, but she just doesn't want to leave the planetoid with this 8th passenger in tow. Now, researching these videos is fun, but keeping track of everything can be overwhelming, which is a problem that Milanote solves. Milanote is an organizational tool that lets you keep track of everything: documents, videos, snippets of text, whatever you need, all in one place. For Fury Road, for example, Milanote let me keep the screenplay, the interviews, and to-do lists all in one spot, and even let me draw some arrows. There are over 100 built-in templates that you can use to get started, and Milanote makes it easy to share your board so you can collaborate or just bounce ideas off somebody. And Milanote is free to use, so if you've got a creative project you want to start working on, sign up by using the link in the description, and if you already use Milanote, let me know in the comments. Kane wakes up and says the last thing he remembers.
I remember some horrible dream about smothering.
You can't spell smother without mother! Okay, on to the big moment. While they're all chatting casually, Ash can be seen watching Kane carefully before anything happens. Ridley Scott uses again that dangling alien tail fake out image in the form of a noodle hanging from John Hurt's mouth. John Hurt gradually and organically begins coughing. It's just smartly segued into by Kane and Parker laughing about the gross food, so that we just think Parker made him laugh too hard with his crass joke to Lambert about eating something else. Or maybe Kane just doing a bit that the food is this gross he's gagging it up. But no, as the characters realize it, we realize it, this is real. Something's happening, and it all transitions to hell. Okay, yes, the actors knew an alien would be bursting out of Kane's chest. They did read the script, they saw the chestburster designs beforehand, but what they didn't know was that for this take, a blood squib was strapped to Hurt's chest, and that it would spray them with blood at this particular moment. And not just from squib cannons, but there were other cannons of blood pumps rigged all over the table. So when that blood initially squirts on Lambert, Ash, Dallas, and Parker, Lambert's shriek and the actors' looks of shock were genuine for that particular shot. I think the myth that the whole thing was a surprise, which is ridiculous when you think about it, came from people misinterpreting what Tom Skerritt said in this interview.
What you saw on camera was the real response. You had no idea what the hell happened. All of a sudden, this thing just came up.
Now, they did try to keep Veronica Cartwright in the dark as much as possible, and they didn't do a rehearsal of the scene, but all the crew were wearing black raincoats, and O'Bannon and Shusett were sitting in the corner giggling, so they all knew something was up. They just didn't know exactly how they were gonna do it or for what take. They actually cut together multiple separate setups for this scene, one with the initial squib going off, then one after this that the actors knew was coming, where the full thing bursts out of a prosthetic version of John Hurt's chest with several blood hoses and pumps to completely cover the set in blood, then a third one with less motion for the close-up of the chestburster puppet rising up from an actor with a stick down below, and then a fourth take where the chestburster flees operated from a concealed trench that was cut into the table. Overall, I love this scene. I've gone as Dead Kane for Halloween multiple times, so I've studied it carefully, obviously, and the chestburster getting snagged by John Hurt's shirt initially was not supposed to happen. They actually frayed the shirt so that it would shred through it, but they love the way that alien just kind of bumped its head on the cloth, and then the blood gushed through the fabric, and it all just looked more authentic that way. Because yeah, you could imagine that happening. John Hurt, of course, was under the table putting his head and arm through a fake torso, and he does such a good job trembling his hands, really sells the viscera of all this. Of course, Iron Man would use the same practical effect for Tony Stark's chest reactor swap scene. Now, the design of the chestburster, in addition to its phallic shape, includes a tiny round mouth with metallic looking fangs. For a guy watching this, having that Freudian fear of being impregnated, it's the worst possible thing you can imagine popping out of you. H.R. Giger actually took inspiration from Francis Bacon's 1944 painting, 3 Studies for Figures at the Base of a Crucifixion. The painting itself was Bacon depicting the Eumenides, or the Furies, from the Greek playwright Aeschylus's play series, the Oresteia, which was the story of the murder of Agamemnon and how violence begets violence in a curse on the house of Atreus. The painter, Bacon, was mixing that Greek allusion with the crucifixion of Christ, which I have always interpreted as a suggestion that Christ's martyrdom was a similar first link in a chain of violence that would consume and define humanity from there forward. I think we can see Kane's death as the same way within the Aliens universe. A scapegoat archetype, the first blood to christen a series of really bad decisions, mostly by the company. They eject Kane's corpse out the airlock, and since it was all miniatures, they actually launched this tiny Kane with a fisherman's catapult. You can see the tiny Kane start to arc. Also, this trench beneath the refinery platform is an inverted Death Star trench, which special effects artist Brian Johnson, who worked on both this and Empire Strikes Back, confirmed. So the crew has to split up. They think they're looking for something no bigger than a Chestburster or a Facehugger, you know, the size of a cat, but when Brett finds this molted skin, we remember Ash's line about the Facehugger shedding its cells and replacing them with polarized silicone, and now it's just a mystery how big it is. The raining water on Brett comes from the condensation from the cooling ducts, as the Nostromo is powered by a nuclear reactor, but tonally it makes us feel like we are outside in a rainy jungle with vines, the turf of a predator. Ridley Scott uses the hanging object device again, the chains dangling from above, making these eerie chimes.
Jonesy.
But really, these ringing chains are meant to be a clue that something is causing this movement, and that is the alien hanging right above Brett. Actually, in the theatrical version of the film, you can see the alien's head poking up from behind the bulkhead, but one of the changes Ridley Scott made for the 2003 director's cut is this one shot of the alien suspended in the chains in plain sight, right there in the foreground. We don't see it, and neither does Brett, because yeah, the water hitting Brett's face, but really just because this alien blends in with the industrial background. And some say you can hear the Xenomorph hiss when Brett first walks beneath it. But I really think that's just the sound of the water hitting the brim of his hat. So Brett finds Jonesy, but the Xenomorph lowers down, and Brett cannot believe his eyes. We just see the shadow on his face, followed by a close-up of its mouth, oozing with the KY jelly that they slathered all over this thing, and then a penetration of its inner mouth, and he's snatched away. We hardly see anything, and it's because Ridley Scott drew from Jaws when it came to restraint in showing the monster. He later told Variety, "You don't show the monster too many times because you'll get used to him, and you never want to get used to him, ever. The best screening room in the world is a space between your ears, which is your brain. So it's learning to tap into the human brain to show just so much. Let the brain do a lot of the work." And it's just so brilliant in this movie, just like the shark beneath the water, or like the spider that we took our eyes off for just a second. It is so more frightening to not see where the monster is. While all we get to see at Brett's fate is the blood that now rains on Parker, Brett wasn't fully devoured so that he could be turned into an egg, as we see later. Ash says something really creepy here that's really easy to miss.
I mean, it's like a man, it's big.
Kane's son.
Kane's son. Ash is likening what happened to Kane to a kind of perverse pregnancy, suggesting that the monster is human progeny. We could also read into Ash's line as him saying Kane's son, C-A-I-N, the brother of Abel from the book of Genesis, who committed the first murder. Ash, in a way, is calling the alien a bringer of death for every generation of mankind to come forward. Actually, in Beowulf, the monster Grendel is considered to be a descendant of Cain from the Bible. Ripley volunteers to go into the air ducts, but Captain Dallas steps up, rubbing his chest, worrying that his chest is gonna end up like Kane's. We pull back through the galley. Just the siren is spooky. One thing people forget about Alien is that it had one of the most effective film trailers with zero dialogue, just the ship's siren playing over rapid cutting shots of the crew panicking. And ending with what I think is the best ever film tagline: "In space, no one can hear you scream," which is also an effective science lesson. There's no air in space, nothing to carry sound. Star Wars kind of made generations of filmgoers think you can hear engine roars and turbo cannons firing in space. But Alien had to prove itself an entirely different flavor than Star Wars. As Dallas combs the vents, Ridley Scott frames Tom Skerritt in wide at the end of the duct, while framing the other four in close-up, making Dallas seem super isolated and vulnerable while letting the other four emote all the tension and panic on his behalf. Scott uses a stand-in for the Xenomorph in the form of the blip on Lambert's scanner, which is in 2 dimensions on a grid, while Dallas is in a 3-dimensional vent system. So when the alien starts moving toward him, he has no idea which way to run. Yeah, Lambert did try to warn him to go the other way, but Dallas just goes right into its arms, and it's yet another horrifying jump scare. Now, you can't really tell of the footage of the alien in this movie, but H.R. Giger's designs had the head built on a human skull prop with visible eye holes when you shine the light on it a certain way. But the xenomorph form doesn't really have eyes. The idea was that it would sense its prey by smell and other instincts. The movie Prometheus would actually explore how the original xenomorph shares human ancestry from the engineers themselves. So Ripley takes charge and she learns about Special Order 937. Nostromo rerouted to new coordinates, investigate life form, gather specimen, priority 1, ensure return of organism for analysis, all other considerations secondary, crew expendable. And after Ripley had snuck up on Ash during his computer work earlier, now he had snuck up on her, and he begins to say there's an explanation, but Ripley doesn't want to hear it. She shoves him. But what was that explanation? Well, corporate greed, of course. Weyland-Yutani wanted the alien for their weapons division, as Ripley surmises later, but it goes deeper. In Aliens, we learned from all the employees' HR files that every person on the crew was a liability to Weyland-Yutani in some way. Like Kane was expelled from medical school in 2108 due to substance abuse. Ripley successfully sued the company over maternity leave after violating bylaw 87B, which tried to prohibit employees from a natural pregnancy coming between their halls. Again, it takes a mother. Weyland-Yutani, in more ways than one, has tried to control pregnancy and incubation. So the Nostromo crew, and perhaps many crews out there working for Weyland-Yutani, were assigned to these kind of deep space hauling missions on the off chance that they'd run across an alien life form, and the company would place this risk on the employees they were most okay to lose. And as Ripley did to Dallas, now Ash seals the door in front of Ripley to force her to deal with him.
Ash, open the door.
As a story really rooted in 2001: A Space Odyssey, this was a direct nod to open the pod bay doors, Hal. And Ian Holm just does an amazing job glitching as he bleeds his creepy milk blood, and he tosses Ripley into Parker's bunk. The true villain has shifted from the Xenomorph. The Xenomorph really was just another survivor, and the real villain of this movie was, of course, the company, Weyland-Yutani. Ash picks up Parker's porno mag. We actually saw Parker flipping through this earlier, and stuffs it into Ripley's mouth. Now, what does this look like, folks? Yeah, the gesture is an intentional form of sexual violence. Ian Holm, Ridley Scott, Sigourney Weaver all even talked about this. They thought it'd be really creepy to imply that the android had some buried sexual urges. So when Parker knocks its head off, that squirting white fluid is kind of like, something else. And it just dawned on me how big of a mistake it was to do that bit earlier. But I just love the practical effect of Ash's android innards, which is actually made of glass marbles, as they try to spark him back to life, their hand flattening his neck skin, and a match cut Ian Holm's actual head from under the table. We forgive it more because it is practical. We just gotta go with it, and it looks really good. And perhaps the most chilling exchange of the film, Ash praises the alien.
Perfect organism. Its structural perfection is matched only by its hostility.
Remember, this guy's an android aware of his own artificiality. He admires this engineered organism that can supplant human beings. He goes on,
A survivor, unclouded by conscience, remorse, or delusions of morality.
Delusions of morality. All the ethical decisions that Ripley and the others have been grappling with this whole film were really just a nuisance to him. He is the embodiment of a soulless all-business corporation. But with the phrase, a survivor unclouded by conscience or remorse, he is telling Ripley what she needs to be to defeat the alien. So there is kind of a disguised gift here.
I can't lie to you about your chances, but you have my sympathies.
The smile! His shutdown is kind of like Hal singing A Bicycle Built for Two in his final moments. So Ripley leads Parker and Lambert to initiate the self-destruct sequence and escape on the shuttle. And by the way, the shuttle is named the Narcissus, which, like the Nostromo, also takes its name from a vessel in a Joseph Conrad text, an 1897 novella whose name you're free to look up on your own. Ripley tells them,
We're gonna need coolant for the air support system.
Coolant. These are the gases that Ripley sprays on the alien while they're both on the Narcissus later to draw it out. This line is how she knows to use them. Everything in this movie is set up. The Xenomorph corners Lambert and Parker, using the fact that there are two of them, because since Lambert can't move out of the way, Parker can't use the flamethrower on it without killing Lambert too. Unclouded by conscience or delusions of morality. This is what it means to be an apex predator. You have nothing else to defend. That will be what Ripley exploits against the alien queen in Aliens. The queen is vulnerable because she is protecting something. So Parker dies, and it's super violent.
Get out of the road!
Yeah, it kind of sounds like Parker's final words is him screaming to Lambert, "Get out of the room," but according to the novelization in the illustrated story, his final words are actually, "God damn you." Now, the illustration shows the inner mouth puncturing Parker's head, and in the film for about 10 or 12 frames, they actually splice in a very quick shot of a prop head made to look like Parker's head, filled with this pink brain matter that was punched with a pneumatic rod. Meanwhile, Lambert's death is overtly sexual, the hooked tail creeping in between her legs and snatching her from somewhere, and Ripley just has to listen to her screams, helpless. So we watch every tedious step of Ripley going through the self-destruct sequence, the extreme close-ups of her unscrewing every bolt, pulling every lever to open the hatch. It's just a whole thing. Now, the instructions detail the scuttle procedure, scuttling being a nautical term meaning to deliberately sink a ship to keep it out of the enemy's hands. Now, the directions you'll notice are in English on the left and then on the right in French. And there is a fascinating detail here. When Ripley first reads the instructions, she runs her finger on the English steps, but later when she tries to abort the self-destruct, in her panic, she reads from the French instructions, which tells us that she reads French as well as she reads English. But when you translate those French instructions, they're not complete. They actually omit the steps of removing the nuclear head, activating the push button switch, and replacing the nuclear head. It could just be a production design mistake, but really the only parts of that in French are verify that it's secure. But I think that is why Ripley gets frazzled when she tries to undo it. These British Weyland shipbuilders hated the French so much they didn't print proper translated instructions. They should have left it to the Yutani side of the corporation. Actually, blogger Dave Addy has an amazing post from 2014 about the textual details hidden throughout this film. But here, Ripley punches these buttons on the keypad, and designer Simon Dearling printed a bunch of interesting Hindu and Sanskrit terms because he was reading Helena Blavatsky's The Secret Doctrine while working on this movie, and this book tries to explain the origin of the universe in terms derived from the Hindu concept of cyclical development. So if you look closely, we see on these buttons Shakti, which is cosmic energy in Hinduism, Yoni, which is an abstract representation of the Hindu goddess Shakti, Yoni being Sanskrit for womb, Linga, aka Lingam, which represents the Hindu deity Shiva and is balanced by Yoni, and then Pranic Lift 777, prana is a Sanskrit word for life force, then Padme, which is a variant of Padma, Sanskrit for lotus flower, and yes, the same origin George Lucas used for Padme in The Phantom Menace, and then Agaric Fly, which is a play on fly agaric, which is a mushroom and psychedelic known for triggering hallucinations. Fittingly, this button is right beside a button labeled Trip. Okay, on to Ridley Scott's biggest change between the theatrical cut and the director's cut. Ripley finds the egg chamber. Now, Scott initially removed this from the 1979 version because he didn't want to slow down the intense pacing of Ripley escaping the ship, but he put it back in for the 2003 director's cut. So using the light of the flamethrower, Ripley finds a still alive Dallas and a further along Brett in stages of being turned into alien eggs. Now, in xenomorph nomenclature, this stage is called ovomorph, ovo meaning egg. And now the cycle is complete. Xenomorphs reproduce not just through a parasitic process, but by using captured prey and converting their bodies into new egg material. And they keep them alive for the whole time. And we hear Dallas croak, "Kill me." Oh God. Now, the whole process of xenomorph egg formation and the alien queen get explored much further in Aliens, but here, just watching this 1979 film with the restored original director's cut, it's just a horrifying bit of world building. But this scene actually explains why, in the theatrical cut, Ripley's flamethrower has no more juice when she runs into the xenomorph on the way to the shuttle. It's because she spent all that fuel making sure Dallas and Brett wouldn't suffer any longer and that these eggs wouldn't survive. But with it blocking her path, she needs more time, but unfortunately the window is closed to abort the self-destruct, and the directions were in French. So now Ripley has to go back for a new flamethrower, and I love the little detail that she turns away from the billowing steam to keep it from going out. And what is so effective about this final act is that the self-destruct countdown, the sirens, the steam, the shaky cam, Sigourney's panic, it's also intense. It just kind of feels like enough of a climax that we forget that we didn't get a Ripley versus Xenomorph showdown. The explosion handles that. But as I mentioned before, as Ripley boards the Narcissus, a full 4 minutes before anything bad happens, she does look directly at that Xenomorph hiding in the wall, but neither she nor we the viewers notice it. This also was added for the director's cut because Ridley Scott just wanted to mess with the eagle-eyed, paranoid fans who had seen the film countless times to give them something new to find. Now, the shot of the shuttle from the outside with Ripley in the cockpit was actually the scale model of the shuttle with tiny TV screens in the window. And that actress, if you look closely, playing Ripley for these shots isn't even Sigourney Weaver, it's a stand-in. And the shuttle screen reads Purge on a red screen, which is actually the same screen Ridley Scott would later use for Blade Runner. So Ripley escapes in the shuttle and kablooey! Ripley thinks she's safe, she strips down to go back into cryosleep, she's super vulnerable now. Just when we think the movie's over, the Those lumpy HR Giger bulkheads deceive us once again, and there is no sleep because the spider just crawled behind the headboard. Now, Ripley's first instinct is to hide in the closet, like another final female, Laurie Strode in Halloween, but she realizes she has no choice but to take action here. She quietly slips into the spacesuit, she arms herself with a grappling gun, and she draws out the alien by venting these gases. If you look closely at this list, you can see she at first vents iodine pentafluoride and methyl chloride, but she moves on to nitrosyl chloride, which is known to be toxic and to irritate the lungs, eyes, and skin. So to calm herself, Ripley sings.
You are my lucky star.
So we come back to our big mystery. What is this song? This is You Are My Lucky Star. It's the closing number from 1952's Singin' in the Rain. It's a Hollywood classic, and reportedly Ridley Scott was unhappy with Sigourney Weaver for improvising it because they had to pay for the rights to it. But it is the closing song of one of the all-time greatest films, and Weaver is sampling it as a closing song to this film, which also ended up becoming an all-time great film. Interestingly, I think it's the only actual pop culture reference from our world to appear in this film. And since Alien is set in the year 2122, it suggests that a film that came out all the way back in the 20th century, 1952, is still a timeless classic 170 years later. It is the ultimate compliment, and for Sigourney Weaver, it immortalizes the film she is in. Because why is this song so important to Ripley the character? No, it's not a grim reference to Brett and the alien singing in the rain of the cooling ducts. You could say that Ripley might have sung this song as a lullaby to her daughter, the one she fought the company over, one whose story we'll get to know of in Aliens. But the most important context comes from knowing the movie Singin' in the Rain. In this scene, at the end of the film, Gene Kelly, playing the movie star Don Lockwood, finally gives credit to singer Kathy Selden for her uncredited voiceover work.
That's the girl whose voice you heard and loved tonight. She's the real star of the picture.
So Ripley is singing this as a meta acknowledgement that despite being outshined, ignored, and abused by her crewmates, now she is the real star of the picture. But the truly crazy detail about this song choice is that in Singin' in the Rain, that star is played by Debbie Reynolds, Carrie Fisher's mother. Reynolds, being who she was, is really what made Carrie Fisher Hollywood royalty, and you could argue that is what got Carrie Fisher the part of Princess Leia over Sigourney Weaver. Now, yes, Sigourney Weaver was too tall, and Sigourney Weaver's father was a former president of NBC, so she had a leg up too, and at the end of the day, Fisher was just perfect for the role. But in the same way, Sigourney Weaver was perfect for Ellen Ripley. Tall enough to stare down a towering xenomorph and not flinch. But Sigourney Weaver pays homage to the mother and daughter who paved the way for her. It takes a mother. It took Debbie Reynolds opening American film audiences' minds to overlooked women, opening the door for her daughter to be the star of the biggest film franchise of all time, a film that was such a game changer that it opened the door directly for Alien and for Sigourney Weaver's career thereafter. And now Sigourney Weaver sings the song to link all of these women together. That human spirit is what gives Ripley the courage to defeat the alien by blowing it out the airlock, shooting it with the grappling gun, and torching it with the engines. And in some amazing attention to detail by James Cameron, 1986's Aliens will open with that grappling gun still wedged in the door. So we end with the image of Ripley back asleep in the cryopod, kind of like the sleeping star child in 2001: A Space Odyssey, dormant in a shell of her own, waiting to be cracked open, like the eggs Cain stumbled upon. Dan O'Bannon choosing the word alien for the title because it was a noun and an adjective is because he wanted Ripley to be able to relate to the feeling of being an alien, an outsider, a survivor. She is the alien of this movie, and she turns it on its head to be a synonym for a survivor. And as we will see throughout the Alien franchise, when you wake up a survivor like this from her slumber, you better be prepared to face the painful truth that there's a reason she has survived this long. It's because she knows how it feels to be alien. Alien! My favorite film. Next up on the deep dive is going to be Aliens, which is also a perfect film for entirely different reasons. Thank you so much for your patience. To make these true deep dives, myself and our talented editors, including lead editor Devin Cleary, Aaron Carrione, and Tanner DiGirolamo, work incredibly hard on these. And the best way to support us is by grabbing a Survive the Dive shirt available at nerdriot.shop. Please comment down below with your favorite detail from this film. Subscribe to the deep dive into all 3 channels on the New Rockstars Network. You can follow me at Erik Voss and to my divers of the deep. If you see a spider crawl beneath your bed before you fall asleep tonight,
I can't lie to you about your chances, but you have my sympathies.